The topic for today's video: if you could only have one compressor plugin, what would you choose and why? I think there are more compressor plugins on the market than just about any other type of audio processor. And so you would think that would make this selection very difficult for me, but it's actually not too difficult. We're looking at this from the lens of somebody that's, working with what's just built into their DAW, and then they want to add one more thing. What would be the move to make? And for me, it's going to be DMG's Trackcomp 2, specifically because of the gain staging and how that works and how easy it is. And also because it has models that I know what to expect when I bring it in. It may not be exactly the same as some of the other ones that are out there that are just dedicated to that one thing, but I have a pretty good idea of how it's going to clamp down and adjust the dynamics of my sound, of my signal when I bring it in. I'm lucky, or maybe not lucky, maybe just too much of a nerd, where I've spent so much time just like testing out different styles of compressors on different audio signals. So I know what to expect with those models. But I think for a lot of people, especially if you're the sort of person that works from scratch and then tries to take your track all the way through to final master, seeing numbers like 76A, 76D, 2A, 2K5, that means nothing to you. And so the learning curve might be a little bit steep. And for those people, I think something like the Fabfilter Pro C2 or the Klanghelm, I can't remember the exact name of that compressor, but the one that has the adjective modes like snap and crush and smooth, that could be a great option. Or like the Presswork, where again, it very specifically has things like vocals, drums, bus, a limiter built in. That's a great option as well. Because it's so hard for people that are new to music production to not get caught up in just the sort of toyish nature of compressors, the fact that there's so many things and they always have cool interfaces, but at the end of the day, they're all doing basically the same thing, just in kind of different ways. And I like the Trackcomp 2 because I know what to expect from those models, and I can very quickly and easily just change a few parameters and hopefully get the sound that I want. But if you're new, that might be a little bit overwhelming. This is not going to be the kind of video where I'm going to say, oh, okay, in this scenario, I would use the 1176. In this scenario, I would use the G bus, and there's so many videos out there like that. But what I found over the years of doing a lot of research and watching a lot of people kind of explain their mix choices and explain their compressors, their reasoning a lot of times is just, well, this is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I'm used to using here. And I like the way that it works in this situation. It doesn't mean that that's the only thing they could use. That's just what they're comfortable with. There's no kind of best choices and worst choices. It's just what fits that signal and sounds right to you, and hopefully is enhancing the audio and not detracting from it, depending, again, on what you're actually going for. So we're going to go into the DAW. We're going to look at some of these compressors, and I'm just going to, again, talk about the reasons why. For me, as somebody that mostly does like dance music, EDM, pop music, those sorts of things, personally, for dynamics processors, I find that, the transient shaper that's built into my DAW and peak limiters, whether it's just, again, the basic one in my DAW or something like DMG track limit, way more valuable to me than compressors, except for the scenarios where they aren't, when I know for certain that I need to use a compressor because it's going to handle that audio in a different way. And a great example of that is like RVox from Waves. If I have a vocal track, like a lead vocal, I know that RVox is going to appear somewhere in that chain. Other compressors might appear. Maybe a little bit of peak limiting will be introduced, but I need that RVox. Is that my number one selection though? Could I live without it? Yes, I could, because the DMG Trackcomp could do something similar to the RVox. It just takes me a little bit more time and kind of making that right selection to figure it out. Anyway, enough blabbing here at the beginning. Be sure to leave your comments down below about what your go-to compressor would be if you could only have one. And that's a very tough question. So I don't want people saying, well, I use this on the master bus and I use this here and I'd use this there. No, that's not the point of this. The point is only one. What would be that one that you would hold on to? And also be sure to tell the genre of music that you work on. People that work on rock music or like metal music, actual recordings, maybe you work on like smooth jazz. That's very important when it comes to then that one selection on compressor. So without further ado, let's get into the DAW and we'll just talk about this a bit further. We're not going to do a ton of audio examples because with compression, everything is so program dependent or song dependent. We have a snare sound here, and I listen to that snare sound, and do I need compression? I don't know. I haven't added anything else in. There's no drums, there's no guitar or melody element or harmony element. This sound might be perfectly fine without any sort of compression at all. Or maybe you need compression. Maybe you want it to punch more. Maybe you want it to snap more. Maybe you want to eliminate some of the peak, in which case I'd probably use a peak limiter. But there's just so many questions and so many factors every single time you pull to a compressor that it's not about finding the quote unquote best compressor for the job, because that just doesn't exist. It depends on what the job is. And so the right compressor for this snare sound could be any number of things depending on what it is that you're going for. And at the end of the day, and I know I say this over and over again, having a good song, maybe even an average song, is more valuable than amazing compressor technique or compressor selection, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day if the sound selection isn't good and if the song isn't good. Anyway, this is our snare sound. And we're going to bring up one of the compressors that I would say could certainly be in contention for the one and only compressor you need. Here we have adjectives. We have smooth, we have punch, we have snap, and we have crush. Punch, I would associate with a VCA style compressor. Snap, I would associate with like a FET style compressor. Smooth, I would associate with something either digital or potentially opto style. And crush, I have no idea. I'm just assuming that it's super distorted and saturated, and it's going to really hit the signal hard. What exactly this corresponds to in the real world, I don't know, but if I needed to crush something, that's what I would use. So I like these adjectives. I like how that works. So I'm just going to go into smooth mode real quick, and we're going to leave these settings basically as they are. We can maybe increase the release time just slightly so we don't get any like artifacts based on that. But otherwise, I'm just going to bring the threshold down, and we're going to listen to what it does to the signal. Let's turn on our automatic gain compensation. I'm going to go right till we get about to 3. And let's see what this is doing to our signal. So that's having almost no impact whatsoever. It's probably catching the transient slightly, but would this make sense for this snare sound? To me, no, because I could just use something else. Like, I don't think compression is necessarily appropriate here. Let's try going to punch mode. And notice just how much more gain reduction it's doing in this other mode, despite the settings staying exactly the same. And we've also introduced, despite having automatic gain compensation turned on, a couple dB into the signal. So that's really changed the transient characteristic. It's really kind of changed the envelope of the signal. It actually loses power on the back end, but it gains some punch power on the front end of the signal. Now let's go into snap mode. And let's try crush mode as well. And we'll just go through all of them again quickly. So it's tricky, right? Like, we can hear the way that it really kind of changes the timbre and the shape of this sound in punch and snap. And smooth and crush, I'm not really hearing that much of a difference to the signal. Let's go into the presets real quick and just see what we have for snare sounds. Okay, so this is supposed to soften it up. Let's see. And it kind of does that. I actually kind of like what this is doing to the signal. Here's solid. Here's snap. And that's definitely adding a lot of snap. Might be a little too extreme. And yet it still added all of this gain. And now we move over to toms, where actually that sounds pretty good on the signal as well. The point that I'm trying to make here isn't to say that this compressor is good or bad for this signal. It's just the fact that there are so many different timbres and ways that you can manipulate the sound that, depending on your situation, you could probably find the right setting in here. Or if you really want to go crazy, you could go into expert mode and try to fine tweak this even more. What I also like about this compressor specifically is the fact that you have options like styles, and we could go in and try to say, okay, well, what's something in here that might be interesting? Let's try vintage track compressor. And I could then tweak some of these settings. And I would definitely have to go in and tweak some of the attack and release. But you can see there's a program dependency that's been added to the release here. And that's probably what's helping with this idea of vintage track compressor. And I like what that's doing. That is kind of reminding me of the SSL like E-series channel just right out of the gate. If I just was to change threshold ratio and maybe touch on the attack and release. But I don't like this because there's just so many knobs. And that sounds silly, but when I'm working, I need to be able to do things quickly and easily. So let's try a couple other compressors on this snare sound before we talk about why I've selected the compressor I've selected as my one and only. All right, so here we have 3 examples of compressors, one that I would consider to be smooth, one that would be kind of like that punch mode, VCA, one that would be more of that snap mode or FET. And as you can see, this one's called fetish. So we'll start with the smooth one. I don't think I have ever used a opto style compressor on a snare before, but this will be the first time that we do it. And it's not that it's going to be the wrong reason. We're just going to hear what happens. I'm not sure why that side chain is turned on like that, but whatever. Okay. Okay, that works for me. That's a pretty flattering sound, to be honest. So, you learn something new every day. It definitely is grabbing, it's changing the way that front end sounds versus the back end for sure. And it just doesn't react as quickly as some of these other ones will. Okay, so there would be an example of doing something smooth. This one, we do have control over things like attack and release. So let's go ahead and bring this on. Get around, yeah, that's a good range. We're gonna go for punchy here. Okay. Turn the transformer on if we want to. Okay, so we can hear what that's doing to the signal. Again, you could fine tune those settings, doesn't matter. And finally, we'll go into the one that I'm expecting to be a little bit more snappy. 8-to-1. Let's get that snap coming in, nice. I'm trying to fine tune that snap. And we can try slam mode too. Didn't really make that big of a difference in this case. I'm not sure if that's working properly. But anyway, here you can hear more of that snap coming through. And the point that I'm trying to make here is just that there's not like necessarily a right or a wrong. It's just the different ways that it's shaping this sound. Totally dependent on what else you're doing in your track and what you're trying to accomplish with that snare. So just very quickly want to kind of cover that first. All right, now that I've gotten my ranting and ravings out of the way, we can actually talk about my one and only compressor if I had to choose. This time we're going to start with this one, and then we'll kind of talk about some other ones. So what I really love about this one are the input-output controls, the way that this works, and how easy it is to kind of gain stage and get to where you want to get to. Some of the other things I like about it is that in many of these models, you have the ability to step through. So what I hate with compressors is having that ability to sweep like this to get to your different settings. And I just like that flexibility of knowing that I can go so much faster by doing this, because what's the difference between 1.56 and 2? You know, I want to be able to jump from 2 to 4 to 8 very quickly. And then if I need to fine tune, I could, but I really like having that as an option. What I like about this are these various models. So I don't use the DMG mode mainly because I don't feel super confident about making selections here with the curve. So I know what that's kind of doing, like it's shaping the curve of when something's going past the threshold, like on the attack and the release. So there's so many ways you could think about how somebody would turn a volume fader, the speed at which they do it, and that's kind of adjusting that, but I don't feel super confident with it. I like being able to see if I have these sorts of options like knee settings. I like being able to then see what's happening. Like I can do here, when I change the knee, I can very easily see how sharp that is, how much that's changing. And with certain compressors too, if you have curve options, you'd actually literally be able to see how that's changing. Like, you know, here we have an S curve, and I know exactly what to expect with an S curve, but I don't know 100% what's going on with these logarithmic versus linear, so I just kind of leave it alone. I'm sure you could get pretty much any sound that you want out of something like this. I just don't feel confident with it. So that's on me personally. But what I do love is having the E channel and then having, again, access to changing some of these things, stepping through the controls or fine tuning the controls if I need to do that. And you can use your mouse wheel to slide as well, which is really nice. And you can see we have things like ranges on here in the red that gives you an idea like of the original hardware. Or again, I could just skip to like the two different settings, 100 milliseconds all the way up to 4,000, so 4 seconds. And that would be like the two different settings maybe on, you know, that E channel. And what's nice about this one is with auto gain, you have a unique feature like desk, and I love clicking that. It just adds like a nice, I think it makes the signal a lot louder, but it does something cool to it. And again, that's like a VCA sort of channel style. You have your bus compressor and you have those various controls that you're expecting. And again, I can jump through the settings or I can fine tune and get what I want. We have an auto release that we can use on most of these things. We have a basic high pass filter for the side chain that we can use. Auto gain feature that we can turn on, and it will hit one or the other of those and make the adjustment. I typically will put it on makeup, and then I'll use the output to do my gain staging. We have a couple of FETs with our 76s series. We have the LA2A, which is an opto style. We have the DBX 160. That's pretty much primarily just for like crushing drums. There's also this unique Zener that I don't really know much about this in the hardware, to be honest with you. So I don't really use this model on this because I don't know what to expect, but there's just a distortion mode. There's also a compressor limiter. And then we have the API, 2500, which is an awesome compressor. And I love that compressor just in general, but it's cool to have it right here for me. So this is the number one compressor that I use because it's so fast and so easy to work with. I have an idea of what all of these things are supposed to sound like. And that's what helps me out so much, is the fact that I know what to expect when I select them. If you don't know what to expect with this, there's a steeper learning curve to it, and that's why I would probably recommend something different. And speaking of something different, we've already looked at this one in the example, but the Klanghelm DC8C is a great alternative because, again, it gives you adjectives. and it gives you some really good starting presets that you can work with. So this would be an option, definitely a very budget, user-friendly option. Highly recommended for your first compressor, and it will do most of the things you need it to do. So you know that the stuff that's built into your DAW is typically going to be very clean. So this one can add some color and it can do things a little bit differently. Again, it has that sidechain high pass filter in here for you, and then it has your basic controls that you need in these different modes. So I think this one is great and nowhere near as steep of a learning curve as the Trackcomp has. Likewise, the Pro C2, if you aren't on quite as much of a budget, is a great option. The only downside to this compressor, in my opinion, is sort of this final gain staging. I just do not like on the Fabfilter things, these knobs at the output. I would love it to be something closer to what we just saw with the DMG. That being said, again, it gives you adjectives for the type of compression that you're going to apply. Also has a vocal mode, which is much more similar to something like the, oh my gosh, I can't think of the name of it now. The RVox, where you could turn this on and you could turn on the auto release and kind of fine tune it. Definitely awesome option to use. You have things like drums or bus or punch. So depending on what you need, pumping if you're doing sidechain things. I think this is a phenomenal option for the modern music producer who knows nothing about historic compressors, but wants some of those various options and tonalities. So it is a really, really great and powerful compressor. It could definitely be your one and only. For me personally, I can work faster with the Trackcomp. The other thing that's nice here is the tracing. So if we were to see an audio signal, we would get that waveform there. If you're more advanced, you don't necessarily need it, but you can actually see exactly how the compressor is reacting to your signal, and that can be very useful when you're first starting out. When you get more advanced, you don't really need it because you're just going to instantly be able to hear what's going on, but a very good option, no doubt about it. And finally, what we have is Presswork. And I think that this one is good for the same reason that that Klanghelm one is good, not from this advanced panel, but being able to break it out into these other panels that has some preset stuff going on in the back. So for example, with your vocal compressor, very quick and easy to work with just a ratio. You have the response timing a little bit. You can enable a de-esser. Great, simple. Is it better than RVox? For me, no, but it does the trick. You have a drum compressor, a bus compressor that looks very similar to the SSL, and you have a limiter in here if you need it, as well as a little mid-side thing that we're going to look at. So this is cool because it also is giving you a limiter that you could apply if need be. It would be really awesome if you could stack these things on top of each other, like you could have the easy compressor followed by the limiter, but you know, whatever, you can just load up 2 instances of the plugin. The other thing that's great about this one are, of course, access to these presets, and you can just go in here and look and read and see what they offer you. So for example, let's look at here. This is 2-track mixdowns. This would be on your mix bus, I assume. So you could add in something that corresponds to a tube limiter. I'm sure there are some amazing presets in here, gentle mix bus, or specifically for the different views, you have some presets as well. So for example, on, let's say the easy compressor, if you just want to have, let's see, easy program compressor, let's load that up and see what that looks like. It's already got some settings in here for you, and you could just start to bring that threshold down and see if the compression is doing what you want it to do. So this would be another potential option if you could only have one compressor. And finally, you might be wondering, okay, Brian, well, you've shown us a bunch of compressors that have a lot of different modes that you can click through, but what about of like the third party, just like individual compressors? What would be the thing that you would want to give up the least? For me, it would probably be the glue. I find that this thing just does what it's supposed to do every single time with little fuss. And I tend to use this in most tracks on the drum bus and then on the master bus. And it usually always works in both of those instances where compression is almost always used or encouraged at the very least. But otherwise, I think that's where we're going to end the video. I hope that this has been useful for some of you, or at least it makes you think about things slightly differently. Again, I'm a big believer in you only use a compressor when you feel like you need a compressor. You don't just throw it on there because people have told you that you need to throw it on there, or you've seen people put compressors on every single track. So a lot of times it's not really necessary. I've watched a lot of people do mixes and go through mixes and explain their reasoning and their thought processing. And a lot of times I would question it. I would say, okay, no, but why really? Why are you putting this on here? It's not really changing the sound at all. I don't notice it making a big difference when you take it in and out in the context of the mix. And they might have a very compelling reason. They might say, hey, bozo, you got to get your ears checked. But I tend to use compressors when I really have a reason to do it. And otherwise, I just leave it out. So that's where we're going to end the video. Be sure to leave your comments down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, anything else you can think of. Leave it down there. And until next time, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.